Yeah, so Kuching was close to the ocean, so out to the sea, and so a lot of its business was fishing and like um, seafood, and so a lot of imports. So a lot of the workers would do that, and also another thing, a typical job for the people we taught, for the tribal people, or they had so many things, but to help you understand, I'll just refer to them as Malaysians for that. But they would do a lot of construction work, what we would call construction. So they'd build a lot, and so they would build the buildings, and they would do all this kind of like construction related jobs. And it was interesting because a lot of the Chinese people would have like the manager positions in those jobs, and so they would be like the bosses or the overheads, the CEOs, and so or they'd have more of the we would call white collar jobs, like being accountants or having technology, fixing things like that. And so they would, it almost created a resentment or animosity between the people I taught and the Chinese people just because of that, because it was almost like they almost viewed it as favoritism, like the government favored them, or that they had that they were actually educated, and a lot of the Chinese could could read and write and had a more than just a second grade or first grade or fifth grade education equivalent. And so but yeah, and so it was pretty close to the sea, Kuching, and it was a pretty big city, and the main transport for a lot of people were basically mopeds. So they were mopeds, or small little bikes, And it was really funny because everywhere, like, I don't think I ever saw just one person riding on the bike, like how we'd see in America, just one or two people at most. They'd always cram like 5 to 6 people on it, and if there was kids, there'd always be more. So that was the main transportation, is the little mopeds. And as missionaries, we always wish we could have that as a transportation, because that was a lot better in our minds versus biking, because it was faster and everything, and you could carry a lot more food on it than putting it on your bike handles. And another main transportation was buses. So buses were another one, and so buses and cars. And the traffic there, they really don't obey what we would call it, or have it in America, like the lights and everything. It was kind of like, they did have lights for sure, but a lot of the times they would just go with the flow of traffic. You'd have to go. If they were going, you'd want to go. And people would always cut in and out. I think I saw accidents every day, without a doubt, from mopeds, mostly mopeds. And so that's kind of like there. They always, they use roundabouts, and the roundabouts for them, whereas if you've ever seen a roundabout in America, they're pretty small, but over there, they're just like these really huge things. I guess to give an idea of how big, it was like a gigantic circle, maybe like the size of like 3 or 4 roundabouts here, like they're almost the size in terms of like how big it was. And that was something that really blew my mind. And so it was really hard to miss your exit, because you had enough space to go from one and then enter. And so that was interesting that they did have roundabouts in my areas. And some of the places, they didn't have actual paved roads. Like most of the time you're going to be on like dirt or semi-paved roads. And so like in process, some areas definitely had more paved roads. They did have a lot of buildings that would go up, and more like apartment complex, so something you'd see in like a big city, any kind of city like Phoenix or Los Angeles or New York. They did have buildings like that, but the buildings weren't well kept. They were usually pretty like damaged, or what we would think of more run down or ghetto. That would be terms like that came to my mind. They had a lot of similar shops set up to us, like almost like outlets. They had a lot more type of outlet type of places. They also had a lot of markets, so they'd have like just markets, and people cooking their food right there and offering it. And you never knew if the people had actually cleansed the food, like you think about here, like making sure we have those rules, for vendors and everything, and making sure it's clean and everything. And you, as missionaries, I personally loved eating those food, and because it was really good. And I'm not sure if it was the safest thing to do that, but I really enjoyed it. I never got sick, at least as I could tell from that. I know some missionaries personally just decided not to eat as much, or maybe depending, they'd check it out, like, okay, like let's make sure. It was really because of it rains every day in Kuching, and in most Malaysia, it'll rain every day, is that it's really green. So it's almost like a jungle in that sense. Like if you've ever seen a video of a jungle or a picture, it was very green and lush throughout the city. It wasn't just all buildings and concrete or metal and everything. And it was really interesting to see that. They did another thing about Malaysia and even in Kuching was that they had a lot of knockoffs of places, so knockoff brands. So like an iPhone, they'd have the knockoff version, and they make it look really close. And also just with like watches, they'd have like fancy watches you see, but they were the knockoff version. And so sometimes missionaries like to get that just because, and sometimes they couldn't tell, but they'd like to get it just as a souvenir. That was a common thing, is to go get things like that. And so that was something interesting I saw. I'd see people with lots of things like that, or even just jerseys from like, say, like a basketball team, like the champions, 2012 champions, but it wasn't the actual team because they had sent it off to Malaysia instead of, selling them or keeping them in America or wherever it happened. I would say most of the lifestyle, it was, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, but on it, was that a lot of people would, go to work. They had the same struggles. They go to work and come home and they just want to like smoke their cigarettes, drink, and watch their sports or their TV shows, and to have that. And so that was a lot of the, at least from what I saw, the mentality was to put in your time at work, and most of the people didn't enjoy their work. And so that's what I noticed is that, and that was just because most of the people we worked for weren't as educated, and so they really didn't have the job opportunity, wasn't as big. I do know there was, definitely job opportunity for people who had more education, but that was the hard part is a lot of the people would start working in their young, like teenage years. They'd have to go to work to help provide for their family. And so that was something that was really hard as a missionary to not feel bad and empathize, or to want to help them when you wish like to give them those tools, like we could give them the spiritual tools to be spiritually better, but in terms of a physical life, just your daily life, it was really hard. We couldn't give that, and so that was something we really focused on. The church started focusing on when I was there, is to help the members and just people in general get better educated over there. So that was something I noticed, at least while I was there. So the weather, it rained pretty much every day. The two terms I always describe to people is that it was either really rainy or slightly less rainy. And so I don't think there was ever a day that I can remember, I was looking back at my journals, that it didn't rain. And it would usually rain probably, honestly, 80% of the day. And so as a missionary, you got used to being wet, honestly. And something about their culture, or at least they would shower usually 2 to 3 times a day. So that was really different for me to get used to, because in America you generally shower once unless you do a sport or an activity. And so that was really different. That was really weird to get used to. But if you didn't shower, you would start smelling, and you just want to, because if you're, when you're wet, you can get sicker. But it was really interesting with that. The food was definitely, that was definitely interesting. The crime rate, as far as I understand, there wasn't too much crime. I mean, as far as I remember, with owning guns, there wasn't really, like, it was banned, as far as I remember, to have guns. And so, I mean, obviously that doesn't stop some people from having them, but for the most part, I wasn't too worried. The typical, if you ever were, the typical assault would be with like a machete, or like a rod, or like a pipe or lead pipe. That would be kind of the thing. We did hear stories of that every now and then, but it wasn't like a common occurrence. So for me, I felt pretty safe. I think my mom had a different idea, her image of that, when she heard like Third World and telling me about that. But I felt overall safe in there in terms of that, and with that.